Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Teaching with Inquiry Live. Last week was crazy, so I am so glad to be back here with you. But today I'm going to be talking about the most wonderful time of the year, well, according to the Staples ad, and that is the back to school time. Specifically, I'm going to talk about how maybe this time of year is causing you a ton of stress and anxiety and worry. You're seeing all of the Pinterest, you're seeing all of the Instagram posts of everybody going back to school with their perfect classrooms and looking like they've got it all together. So I wanted to come live and talk to you about back to school and how you can manage these next couple of weeks so that you don't completely lose it. And I thought I would be really real tonight. And I'm coming to you. I didn't even put makeup on because I wanted to be like really real. So normally I'll throw on a little bit. But if you're feeling like I'm a little washed out today, that's because there's no makeup. I still have my lights on, so it's not super dark in here. But we're going to talk about that. So I want to talk about back to school. And right around this time, I get to touch base with so many amazing educators as they're emailing me and talking to me about their back to school worries and stress. And I get a lot of emails. So I wanted to address some of the most common concerns and give people some ideas about how they can handle this back to school stress and anxiety that is inevitably going to occur. I think the number one piece of advice or questions that I often get relates to split grade classes. Now, for most teachers, you might not be in the same situation where you are teaching a split year after year after year. So that's been my experience where I have taught a split grade classroom year after year after year after year, with the exception of this upcoming year, which I will finally have a straight, which I haven't had since the very beginning of my career. So I often get asked, how do you manage a split? And what do you do when the other kids are doing something? Well, my number one piece of advice is when you're given a split is to not freak out. One of the things that we need to remember is that every classroom these days are actually a split grade, regardless of what you've been assigned. As teachers, we are still required to teach the students that are in our class. That means that you're probably going to have a whole host of students that are working on modified expectations that go either above or below the grade level you have. So just because you're given a split grade assignment doesn't necessarily mean that you have a lot different to do than what you normally would do. However, it is a huge mindset shift that you've kind of got to overcome. When I look forward this year to doing a straight grade for the first time, I'll be completely honest with you. I don't think it's going to be a huge workload shift. I'm still looking at a large number of students with individual education plans, ESL needs, and I will still have, even though it says straight grade on my door, I'm still going to have a multitude of learners in my classroom. I'm going to have complex learning needs that I'm going to have to program for differently. I'm still going to probably run it the exact same way. The difference might be when it comes down to science and social studies that I don't necessarily have two sets of curriculum to cover. However, at this point, I'm really so used to teaching two grades and using the flip-flop method that I'll probably end up doing something like that and allowing students to find their own calling when it comes to a split grade. So if you are looking ahead and your year you have a split grade, the first thing I want you to do, don't freak out. And remember that good teaching is good teaching regardless of whether or not you've got a straight grade or a split grade. Differentiated instruction is still going to be the key of what you're going to do in your classroom. You're still going to meet the needs of the learners in your class. Shift your mindset a little bit and stop thinking of it as a split grade class and think of it just simply as your classroom that happens to have learners that have a identified label that's much wider than what you normally would have. But you're still picking kids up on that train along the learning path, and you're picking them up and dropping them off at different points based on their readiness for the concepts that you're teaching, or their modifications or accommodations and so on and so forth. They are still your students and they're still in a class. Try to not worry about what grade they're in until it comes time for assessment. Then you need to know which grade targets a certain grade needs to hit versus the other grade needs to extend upon. But your lessons for things like language and health and drama and media and math can all be the same. You can teach all of those core subjects together, and you can simply just look at it as you're just teaching a wider continuum of students, which is great for your students in the older grade, as well as really good for your students in the younger grade, because they've got a wider range in which the learning that's happening in their classroom, that's much more accessible to those students, and they can grow more at their own pace. Additionally, when it comes time to doing a science and a social studies, one of the keys that I think is really helpful for me is I can plan the same lesson, but have different objectives for the group of students. So I can plan a research lesson where they have to research a topic. So both groups of students are doing the same activity, just the thing they're looking at might be a little bit different. It's a little less, I can give all the same instructions and then just send them off to look at two separate topics. I can do a game or a set of experiments with one group while the other group completes another task. And then I can do an experiment with another group. And then we can talk in science about how that experiment goes through. What's the plan? What were your observations? What was this piece? The same piece of paper can be handed out in an experiment recording page. If your students are doing the same task, but the content of each task is different because it matches their curriculum, for you as the teacher, it feels a little bit more organized and familiar, like you're not doing two wildly separate things. I do like to do in a split grade a flip-flop method where I will have one group for 20 to 25 minutes and then the other group for 20 to 25 minutes. If you're also blessed to teach art or drama, try flip-flopping the other grade, doing a completely different subject. If you're worried that they might not be able to do, say, science or social studies independently, they might be able to do art independently or even a drama activity independently while you do science or social studies with the other grade. But remember, it's a split grade. Every classroom, at least I think every classroom in Ontario is a split grade, just some are labeled that they are or that they aren't. So that's one. If you've got a split grade, don't freak out. That's tip number one. Tip number two that I'm often asked is I can just tell through this tone of many emails that teachers are really anxious about going back to school. And I think it's part and parcel with being teachers that we want to do the best we can for the students that are going to be in our classroom. We get into this profession generally because we love working with kids. We love seeing kids have that spark of learning. We really want to make sure that we can make a difference with the students in our classroom. These are all fantastic goals as teachers. But it also means that while we're waiting to get that started and while we're planning to get that started, that's an enormous amount of pressure that we put on ourselves to be perfect. And in fact, perfection isn't going to happen. I don't think I will ever attain a perfect teaching year in my entire career. It's never happened in the past, and it's never going to happen in the future. A perfect teaching year just won't work. Why? Because I'm working with little humans and they have ideas of their own, and often they help to shape what the learning is going to look like, and I have to be responsive to them. So frankly, I don't know all the time what's going to happen before it actually happens in my classroom. So to worry about planning these perfect lessons that are from now until June and I'm going to plan them all now, it's not really going to work out. And if I feel as though that this is something I have to do and I have to put that pressure on myself, then that's going to be an immense amount of pressure and I'm going to feel that anxiety in me right now. If I have to try to get everything figured out right now when I don't have my students in front of me and I'm not really sure how it's going to work out, and I have to kind of plan for everything, that's a lot of pressure and it increases my anxiety. So instead, what I do is I come up with a plan and I have to be okay with it being good enough, because being done is much better than being perfect. So if I have a plan, I have to just put it down on paper. I write it out. My ideal scenario, this is what it's going to look like. It might not actually look like that. And I've got to be okay. I've got to let go a little bit of that need to control every aspect of every part of my day. And I just have to embrace the idea that there's going to be elements of my plan that aren't going to work. And I can be adaptive and I can change on the fly, because I have to trust myself that I can do the best job I can do for my students in that moment. So when you're going ahead and looking at what it is that you're planning, start with planning just the first week. Lay out what your day plans are going to look like for the entire first week. Have those be really detailed as you can get it. And you can Google first week of school plans, and there's tons of teachers that have shared their plans of what their first week looks like. Plan out your first week, just like you would plan out any week, but plan it out in detail. For the remaining weeks, plan it out less specifically. Have a rough sketch of what it is that you would like to accomplish. Have a long-range plan in terms of topics you'd like to cover each month, but be okay with the idea that it might not be perfect and it might not work out exactly as you've planned, and trust that you're okay and that you will do okay and that it will be all right, that your students will still learn. And even if you don't have every single day planned out from now until June, it's not going to happen, at least in my experience. And then I am an absolute horror to live with if I put that pressure on myself. So embrace that unknown, trust that you're going to do well, plan in detail out that first week, rough sketch out the next week, and just have general topics that you want to cover over those remaining weeks through a long-range plan. And then the rest of it, see how it goes, and release some of that need to be a perfectionist and to have everything planned and be in control of every aspect of all of the learning. Let it go. Let it go into the universe and let it be. The other question I get is about the pressure to have perfect classrooms. Now, I am a girl that loves to have a pretty classroom. And I love to decorate it up that last week. But all of those decorations are just for me. And it's to make my students aware that I have tried my best to plan an environment that I think that they are going to enjoy. I do have flexible seating options in my classroom. Those have been built over time. So if you're starting the first year in a grade, or it's your first or second year teaching, remember that the concept of flexible seating is not about the stuff you have. It's about the mindset of allowing students the choice of where it is in your classroom they will work. Students are creative, and you can have flexible seating even if the only furniture in your classroom has been provided by your school board and you have not been stalking Facebook Marketplace and Kijiji or IKEA, or if you've gone over the border to go to Target or Walmart or all of those places that you might get flexible seating options. You don't have to have any of that in order to have flexible seating, because it's a mindset. When you're looking at decorating your classroom, remember pedagogy first, decorations second. Think about what your students are going to need. I generally don't put anything up on my bulletin boards except for the borders and maybe a headline. And my classroom is fairly blank at the beginning of the school year because the stuff that fills my walls are going to be the things that we create together. So I do pick borders and I put those up, and you can see them behind me. Those are the same borders that I use in my classroom. I pick them because pink makes me happy and yellow is sunshiny and teal, well, I just have it. So, and I know it's busy and I'm okay with it. Everything else is pretty neutral in my classroom. So it is what it is. But I do remember pedagogy first, classroom decor second. So try not to spend all of your time focusing on what your classroom is going to look like if you don't have the sound pedagogy or you don't have a long range plan or things like that in place. Remember, we're not talking detail, rough sketch. As long as you've got that rough sketch and you know kind of where it is you're going and what you'd like to accomplish. Have goals for yourself as a teacher in that aspect too. Know one thing you want to try. Don't try to change all of the things in your classroom all at once. There's a lot of things, spiraling, and you have inquiry, and you have flexible seating, and you have all of these different things, these new things that you want to try in your classroom. Make a goal of what it is that you want to try, but stick to one. Don't try to do all of them this year, because it's going to be overwhelming and there's too many new things that are unfamiliar. So try one new thing, maybe try it first term. And if you do really well at it, pick a new goal for second term. But stick with one thing that you want to try to change about your teaching practice to improve it, and then move on to the next goal when you're done that. The final question I get a lot is about being a mom and being a teacher, and how I strike that balance between being able to be there for my kids as well as being a great teacher. This has been a struggle for me because I put an enormous amount of pressure on myself to be a great teacher in my classroom and to do all of the things and to be a role model for other teachers. But I also am a mom of 3 little kids, 8, 5, and 2.5. And if I throw all of my energy into my classroom, it means I have very little left at the end of the day for my own kids. And as much as I love teaching, and it is my passion and my calling, and it's the thing I think I was meant to do, my kids, I'm irreplaceable to my kids. But I've learned through my maternity leaves that I'm very easily replaceable at work. So I have to remember that my focus, first and foremost, has got to be with my family and with my children. So I would much rather be an A+ mom and a B- teacher than an A+ teacher and a B- mom. So that means in my classroom, I've had to set boundaries and rules for myself, because this is how, if I don't, I push boundaries and I push limits and I do too much at school, and then my kids suffer. So I've had to make rules and boundaries for myself. Number 1, I only plan on Sunday nights, and I plan my entire week on Sunday night, and I do it after my kids go to bed. I try to get everything done. Monday morning, I will show up a little bit early so that I can photocopy the things I need for Monday until my prep. On my prep on Monday, that's when I get the other things for the rest of my week prepared. So I do all of that during my prep. It also means that I can't go to the staff room every single nutrition break, and I try to give up one of my nutrition breaks to do my planning and prep. The biggest thing I learned this past year, previous to this last year, I would leave work at 4:30 every day. This past year, I had to leave work at 3:30 at the end of school every day. I can tell you I didn't get much more done between 3:30 and 4:30 in the years previous that I did this year. The only thing that changed was the bulletin board in my hallway didn't get changed as often as I would like, and some of the bulletin boards in my classroom didn't always get changed as frequently as I would like them to. But I had to let that go, and I think that's the key. If you're looking for work-life balance, there's certain things that you can't do as a teacher, and it's okay if you don't do them. Number one was writing in agendas. I don't have time to do that. If I am on with my students from 9 to 3:15, and I am jam-packing those hours with instruction time, I don't have the half hour or 40 minutes to write in every kid's agenda to respond to every parent's comments. And if I start writing in agendas, there's more and more comments that I have to respond to. Instead, and I'm also not going to use my prep time to respond to those agendas because I have other things that have to do with instruction and assessment to do during my prep time. So I don't do agendas. That's one thing I had to get rid of, and it frees up about 30 minutes of my day every day. I also don't spend a ton of time on homework. I give some guidelines like a homework bingo or a homework calendar, and I send that home with students once a month. And if they, as a family, choose to do it, great. I don't mark it. I don't really collect them. And I simply just let it happen if it's the choice of the family to do so. This has also freed me time because I don't have to plan or prep for things that aren't happening outside of my instructional day. I also am not taking my instructional time or my prep time to plan or photocopy or run off these materials multiple times. And if you have a volunteer doing it, I can focus my volunteers' time when they're with me on doing things that actually impact the instruction parts of my day. I've also had to limit how often I can communicate with parents. Because I'm a talker, obviously. So when I get on the phone with a parent, I often will spend a huge chunk of my prep time on the phone. So instead, unless it's one of those I should probably talk to you situations where it's pretty serious and I need to have a conversation and I should probably not put it in writing, those conversations, those go in the phone call. I make a phone call for those. But all other phone calls that I would just, updates here and there, those are all in email. And I will allow myself to email outside of school hours once I'm home, but I do put a limit on when I will stop checking email. I've also turned off all of the red little notifications on my phone that allows me to see that somebody's emailed me after hours. If I don't see the red notification and I've hidden that email app in a folder, I don't even look at it. And in fact, I don't even know where my email is for school. So I don't want to see any notifications when it comes to school. I will go and look for it and check manually. I will search my phone for the app, find it, and then check my email. And I find that that's a much easier way to set limits and boundaries on my time so that when work time is work time, I am 100% on during those hours. But outside of that time, I do need to let that time go. Now, I will say that I do have the benefit of teaching the same grade for multiple years. So in terms of knowing the curriculum and knowing what it is I'm going to cover, I will have a lot of my material. If I'm completely honest with you, though, I will modify and change up the things even in my own resources to adapt them to the students that I have in front of me, to their interests, to their needs as individual learners. And no one year is ever the same as another. So I never simply just even follow my unit day by day by day in perfect flow. I will interrupt it every once in a while or change something up or alter something because I feel as though in that moment, my students might need something different. I have the core components of my program already put together, but I have the freedom and choice to be able to alter that when I need to. So, in summary, this is a stressful time for us. It's not often the most wonderful time of the year. It's the most stressful, nightmare-filled time of the year when you have all those back-to-school dreams. But to manage some of that stress, my suggestion to you is to forget about working on being perfect. Being done something is better than being perfect. being good is often better than being great because good often means you get done. So don't worry about being great, fantastic, awesome. Just be good enough. And that's okay to be just good enough. Stop aiming for the A+ and aim for a B-, because in telling, your B- is probably still going to be an A anyways. But if we don't aim for this ideal, perfect teacher in a curated Instagram feed, we can just be ourselves and know that ourselves are good enough just the way we are. Trust yourself that you've got this covered, you've got this handled. You were hired and you became a teacher for the right reasons, and you are in the right position and you are doing the right thing. Trust yourself that you've got this. And finally, for moms, you've got to look at cutting some of these things out because you don't simply have the time to do it all. Figure out what's the most important part and aspects of your job, do those. And let some of the other things that are simply just busy work or people pleasing, leave those out and learn to say no to people demanding more and more of your time during the day. It is my hope that I've given you something to think about today that might help you to reframe your ideas about the anxious, anxiety-ridden time that we are approaching as we are getting ready to go back to school. Find yourself some easy solutions and allow yourself a breather to understand that perfection is not the goal here. We're looking at being our good selves, good enough. That's what we're aiming for. So thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you again next week as I share a few of my back to school finds over the next couple of weeks as I walk you through and share with you how I myself am getting ready for the back to school time. So thanks again for joining me, and we will see you next week. Happy planning.